This week I finished off page 5 of episode 4, where the Shipwright finally duels with the wolf. I also decided to go back and revisit the Watchers. I've said many times that with this project I'm stacking the challenges. I'm doing a lot of things that are a bit new to me. This story requires me to draw a lot that's outside of my comfort zone, but I was looking forward to this challenge in particular. The Shipwright had a very brief encounter with the Warthog in a previous episode, but it was over almost as soon as it began. Here, I wanted the fight to be at least a little bit evenly matched. The big goals here are really motion and clarity. I can tell even after this first page that there is a lot for me to learn about conveying motion, but for my first attempt at this kind of fight scene, I'm happy to call it sufficient. I will say it's a lot of fun with dynamic poses like this to try to think about how to compose them in the frame. With my previous project, Tellurian, the frame was always consistent. I was thinking about it more like a storyboard, or like single frames from a finished movie. Currently, I think of Dead Gods as an homage to Sunday Adventure comics, so I've given myself some arbitrary restrictions, but I have a few more options when it comes to the panel shape. It's a good challenge for me to use some of these more vertical compositions. After over 3 years of working wide on Tellurian, it's a refreshing change to use some of these more vertical compositions. A lot of the work I grew up admiring was found in Western animation or European comics, so speed lines weren't something I was that comfortable with. But I've come back around to Japanese comics, and a lot of those artists use them so effectively that I felt like they were worth another look. While I've been working on this project for a while, in the grand scheme of things, this is still very early in the Dead Gods story. The Shipwright, with his 600 years of experience, is highly capable. Part of what I wanted to demonstrate with this particular duel is that he's very skilled, but there are still some major threats in the world that, if he's not paying attention, could take him out. The Shipwright's many centuries have been spent defending his valley from various threats. The wolf, on the other hand, while only 200 years old, has spent almost all of that time focused on becoming more dangerous. Okay, so I walked slowly into a mistake here, but thankfully I think I recovered it. I wanted a couple profile shots where the two characters exchange some banter. At the thumbnail stage, this worked, but every now and then something that works at the thumbnail stage does not translate well to the final. And with them being the last panels of the page, I thought I was ready to move on. Thankfully, I've made it a practice that when I finish a panel, I add it to a version of the finished page. It helps to see them in context. And in context, these two shots did not work side by side. They looked just close enough that it looked like bad planning. It looked like a mistake. The first thought I had was to just zoom in on both of them to get even more extreme profile shots. But they were so close to just being in the same shot together that I thought that would be stronger overall. When there's an opportunity to have two characters in the same image, I think generally that's just stronger. So I made a few edits, moved a few things around, painted some new action lines for the background, and now I think this shot works better. So there we have it, the beginning of our fight scene. Thankfully, from what I have planned, I'm going to have a lot of fight scenes in this story, so I'll be able to get plenty of practice. Way back at the beginning of this project, I drew the first version of the Watchers, angels that had been assigned to different territories on Earth to oversee them, but who rebelled against their creator. They're still a long ways off from actually appearing in the story, but there's no telling what other ways their presence might be felt in it. So since I still have time, as so often happens, the ideas you have early on are fine, but as this project has grown, I've started to think of ways that I could improve them. One of the biggest things is actually pretty simple, and that's that I think they should all be masked. These creatures are not human, and I could spend years trying to design faces for them that worked, and I know I would never hit the mark. Instead, I think this is one of those cases where it's better to let all of our own minds come up with something that works internally. Our minds are very good at imagining the unimaginable and coming up with images that are frankly better than any of us could draw. This first attempt at a second attempt still didn't quite work. My favorite designs are ones that use simple shapes effectively. Detail is fun and an important element, but I like to use it with as much restraint as possible. If I had 500 years to work on this project, likely every surface would be covered in detail, but I would like to live to finish this story. So instead, I want to use somewhat simple shapes to communicate clearly. When I first drew Semjaza here, I had inserted these obsidian spikes into his skull. A fun design, but I think Peter Jackson's Sauron is going to own that silhouette for the next 50 years. I wanted the proportions and the pose to imply something human-ish, but unsettling. He still wears the ceremonial wings, which are an act of stolen valor, borrowing from the symbol of power that is the Seraphim Throne Guardians, and for the sake of legibility, I used that sickly oxidized copper to create some contrast. One last benefit that the masks give me is that they're a nice way to inject even more of that Art Deco sculptural influence. Azazel is cited as teaching mankind many forbidden secrets, in an attempt to lead them to their destruction. So I wanted him to be on the more relatable side. For his mask, I tried to preserve what I liked about his face in the original drawing, but to represent the secrets that he passed on to mankind. Gold is spewing forth from his mouth in a long chain. Here he's presenting a scroll covered in a serpent-like script of spells. I also had an idea for Shamsiel. This is a watcher that's taken on the mantle of the sun. I simplified the sun disk motif so that the disk itself is the face mask. I imagine they weren't all robed in black, with many of them attempting to come across as benevolent. He's robed in white, but that only makes it more obvious that his robes are stained with blood. For his ceremonial wings, embellished with simple eyes, I wanted to pull in a little bit of the feeling of magic, so they are simply suspended beside him. So there we have a revised design language for the Watchers, an attempt to increase the mystery around them. Now I see the Watchers as occupying a very interesting place in this narrative. Most of the gods in this story will be their offspring, the Nephilim, and the Watchers will sit above them, behind them, guiding and influencing from the shadows. Humans rightly fear the Nephilim, but the Nephilim rightly fear the Watchers. To demonstrate this, I wanted to illustrate the idea of a false god being summoned to speak to his master. Someone used to receiving worship and praise, now trembling in fear. So I worked up a design for this door, and then built a simple model for the chambers. I wanted this god to be hunched over in terror, cautiously approaching. And of course, it wasn't until it was finished that I realized I had missed the mark. This could be any large door set into a dungeon. It doesn't have nearly the amount of grandeur that I imagine the Watchers possessing. The Book of Enoch numbers them at 200. They are relatively rare, and they are incredibly powerful. And this image wasn't quite selling that. So I went back to the drawing board and tried to sketch out just the feeling that I wanted, just a much more extreme composition. Using that, I was able to build up another 3D model. This had much more of the feeling of grandeur that I wanted. The long procession to a very, very tall door. Just the feeling of overwhelming scale. This is a glimpse at the power behind the power. And thankfully, because the compositions were similar enough, I could just transplant my original drawings of the Nephilim and his servant directly into this image. Now that feels a lot more like a watcher summoning a god. Thanks for watching, everyone.